Tutti i partecipanti sono in grado solo di ascoltare.
Some information about the cost of the energy efficiency obligation schemes and alternative measures, and also ways that the policymakers had to recover these costs, to assign the cost recovery to different parties within their countries, for example, and consumers or obliged parties, or the possibility to raise the price of electricity, gas, energy efficiency services, and so on. My name is Dario Di Santo. I'm a FIRE Managing Director, and I will chair this webinar. FIRE is the Italian Federation for Energy Efficiency. This is the Italian partner of the ENSPOL project. Now we will have the following speakers. First of all, Blasis Okonomou, who is also the coordinator of the ENSPOL project. He will shortly explain the ENSPOL project and also the situation about some main outcomes related to the scheme cost topic. After him, there will be a presentation from Tina Fawcett regarding the UK scheme. Then Elodie Trossachet for the French scheme, and Alberto Pela will illustrate the Italian scheme. Of the presentation will focus on the cost topic, and some of them will also give some information on the main general aspects of the discussed schemes. You will be able to present questions to the speakers directly while they are speaking, and the speaker will decide if answering them immediately or at the end of their presentation. And there will also be a discussion just after all the presentation, so there will be time to go into details about this topic. This webinar will be also followed by two other webinars next week. One is both of them next week, so you will be welcome to join also them if you're interested in the other topics. So I will just give the word to the panel to Blasis Okonomou for a brief presentation of the ENSPOL project and also for the main outcomes related to cost issues. Have a nice webinar. The microphone, Blasis, please.
Now it should be okay.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you very much for setting up the webinar. I will just briefly present you some things on first of all, on the ENSPOL project for the people who are joining today the webinar and they have not joined the previous ones. So just briefly, you know, we are dealing basically in this project, it's an EC-funded project from the Intelligent Energy Euro program. So mainly we're dealing with the Article 7 of the directive, which is a very complicated article in terms of the policy that it entails, on the energy efficiency obligations and also the alternative measures. And of course it covers the 2014-2020 period. Now, this was the full title of the project. Maybe you're used to the acronym, but this is the full title of the project. It's about energy saving policies and energy efficiency obligation schemes. It's finishing in August 2016, so we are still having a lot of activities till the end of the project. That's the consortium. It's quite a diverse consortium consisting of universities, energy agencies, and representing 10 to 11 countries. These are the main objectives. Just briefly, is first of all to assess the relative strengths and weaknesses of the energy efficiency obligations and alternative measures. So this was more kind of a research component of the project. We have a lot of reports showing all the strengths and weaknesses. all the plans of the member states for the ones who are planning to implement the EEOs, and of course there are still, some updates taking place till the end of the project. Then here we go to the active parts, let's say, of the project, which is to complement and enhance the work of EU and member states, of existing EU and member states initiatives, and to improve the knowledge and capabilities of member states outside the consortium. So basically here what we did is try to help member states who are planning to implement an EEO scheme, or the member states who are revising their EEO scheme, or member states who have been using alternative measures and they are thinking towards shifting them or adapting them to the new realities. So we try to help them on the field how they can do this best, providing them substantial knowledge, experience from other member states in order to come up to a better energy efficiency policy environment for the Article 7. And of course, to strengthen the cooperation and facilitate dialogue across the EU. For today's webinar, as Dario mentioned, the two, if we could consider them as purposes, to insights of costs of various EEO schemes in place. It focuses on EEO schemes, and to provide experience on cost recovery mechanisms that can be useful, especially for starters of EEO schemes. By naming starters, I mean refer especially to countries that have planned or are in the first phase, early phase of implementing an energy efficiency obligation scheme, and there is a lot of knowledge needed. That's our website. You can find all the relevant reports here, and also it's one of our basic tools. It's the platform article7ed.eu. It's quite easy to get, where you can have a lot of information from all member states concerning the implementation of Article 7. So feel free, please, to browse on that. Now, I would, starting from that now, I would like to go to the presentation of today. I'll just provide some basic food for thought on the cost recovery mechanisms, mainly some findings from our project and also from other projects that we have discussed with during this period. So, starting from the basics, it's a very delicate subject. We all know this cost recovery, and this is a lot being asked by member states who are planning to start an EEO. And the main question is, how do we persuade our suppliers or our distributors that they can get some money back, to say it in a simple way. Indeed, there are broad range of costs, first of all related to an EEO scheme, starting from the transaction up to investment costs, and these are carried out either by the suppliers or the distributors, depending on who has the obligation. Actually, we have seen different figures in terms of these costs. Therefore, it's quite difficult to compare them. And normally, the standard practice that these energy efficiency obligation schemes, in a format of an obligation or even a white certificate or more complicated schemes, involve a financial contribution from an obligated party to the overall investment costs for the energy efficiency technology or the improvement or behavioral change, and the remainder part is paid by the beneficiary, so the one who receives this measure. If we have, let's say, exceptions, like in countries where there is the EEO's targeted low-income customers, regulate the energy providers as obligated, sometimes distributors, and the regulators actually must implement a regulatory mechanism to enable the energy providers to recover the costs of meeting these savings, and maybe sometimes also compensate them for the loss of their energy sales. So it's quite diverse ways. If we go to a competitive market, so the ideal, let's say, scenario, then the two options, let's say, these are provided by reports that you can see in the references of the ENSPOL project. So first of all, is to the cost of meeting energy saving targets can be considered as business as usual now. So meaning that the energy providers, suppliers, distributors can adjust their prices to recover these costs. The second option is that these costs can be funded by the government through direct budgetary appropriations or price surcharges on regulated wires and pipes energy providers. Here, it's this I would like to. There are two tables in the next two slides. It gives an idea from the whole EU and say from the member states in the EU who plan to implement or who are already implementing an EEO scheme. Just to give you an idea, this is compiled in 2015, and it's a study carried out by the ATI and Jean Sebastian Brock. It's a quite interesting one. There are questionnaires on various countries to see how they're planning to implement to recover the costs of their schemes. I mean, you can briefly go through that. Just some basic findings from my side, from this side, is that there is no real clear rule. I mean, 8 countries where the obligation is mainly to the suppliers have demonstrated that the energy prices can be modified in order to have the cost recovery. This practically means that energy suppliers can charge more in order to cover their costs. 6 countries are working on a regulated base. So, I mean, there is a regulation on the energy prices, and this mainly refers to countries where the obligation is falling under the distribution. Then, I mean, you can see here there are several cases and different ways of receiving that. There are also some figures that can be for 87 to 110 EEO. You will have, after more detailed introductions on that, from the 3 countries, so from France, Italy, and the UK. And yeah, so basically the rule is that indeed that we have different ways and different means of cost recovery options. Then what happens outside the EU? Because as we know that the EEO is not an European, let's say, invention, if I can name it like that. We have a lot of these different types of schemes working in other parts of the world, which have been quite successful, and they can provide quite a lot of lessons. So mainly what we see in most countries is that there is a regulation to the price. So I mean that the cost recovery has been strictly regulated by the government or by the relatively province or or regulating authority. So starting, for example, in if we take some examples from Minnesota, some of these figures and the data you see here come from the Regulatory Assistance Project. It's from the study in 2012, also from our own study from ENSPOL, and also from the ACEEE. So basically, for instance, if you take the example of US and Minnesota, we have seen that the program costs, including the incentives and operation costs, are recovered through a cost recovery charge, which is determined as part of rate setting. So if the actual costs differ from the amount recovered, then the utility can adjust its rates subject to a commission review. Then if you take the Texas, for instance, there is that utilities are able to recover program costs using the energy efficiency cost factor. It's a specific factor that's determined through base rates or by filling a cost recovery rate scheduling tariff. Basically, this factor is calculated to allow the utility to earn revenues equal to the energy efficiency costs. Then, if you take other examples of Pennsylvania, that there is the plans they have for the utilities for energy efficiency and energy conservation, they propose a cost recovery tariff mechanisms to ensure the recovery of reasonable costs. So there is an adjustable mechanism. In other cases, of course, you have certificate trading, which is one means of subsidizing in one way the energy efficiency costs carried out by the obligated party. Then also, if you take the US example of Arizona, there you have the cost recovery takes place through a demand-save DSM tariff, and practically the utilities can use the performance incentives to assist in achieving their goals. Then in China, it's a bit more complicated. There are 3 means of funding of cost recovery for the utilities. One is through a city utility collected through electricity tariffs, then through revenues from differential electricity prices, mainly to energy-intensive industries, and other fiscal means like energy saving and emission reduction budgets. So this is more or less that you can see the differences between countries. There's a lot, of course, of much more additional information on the ENSPOL website. Now, this is from a study from Lees and Rosen and Gov in 2013. And there you can see some figures out of early evaluation about the capital administrative cost. Of course, my colleagues afterwards can comment much more on that. The basic rule is that for all the EEO schemes, the costs, including capital administrative costs, or the total costs, were below the energy price. So they could be considered in one way as cost effective. Now, some issues that have come up while examining a bit the cost recovery mechanisms is an issue of transparency. What does it mean? That in many countries, take for example Denmark or the UK, there is an obligation to report from the utilities the costs to the public authority. sometimes, of course, this requirement is not fully clear. So it could be that the data reported vary significantly in terms of scope, meaning administrative costs, marketing costs, incentive costs. So we can see that there is no coherent, sometimes, way of what types of costs should be reported in order to come up with such an analysis. This is a complex issue, and we need to have an incentive to what type of cost, because if we have marketing costs, for instance, this unveils a strategy of companies. And of course, if you fully blow your costs, what you report, it's a negotiation point for your target setting for the next period. So this is something that it means that clear rules should be defined in order to require the reporting of what types of costs in each time, of administrative costs, transaction costs, and other costs. So I think this was enough for my side. It was a general overview, some food for thought for you. Here is the data. If you want to have also access to the reports, you can contact us. And I wish you a nice webinar and an interesting webinar. We are free for all questions you might have. Thank you very much, Dario.
You're welcome, Vlasis, and thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I think it's time now for Tina Foster to illustrate the first European example about the United Kingdom. So, Tina.
Right, okay. So I'm going to talk now about costs in UK energy efficiency obligation schemes. I apologise, I haven't got a webcam working and I'm in a slightly noisy office, so I hope you'll be able to hear me. What I'm going to do is briefly explain how the UK scheme has changed over time and how the costs have changed. And I'm going to explain how they're calculated, where the data comes from, and what the costs per customer and per kilowatt hour have been in a recent phase of the scheme. So it's just a particular example of what's happened in our country. So just to give you an overview of the UK Energy Efficiency Obligation Scheme, it began in 1992 on a very, very small scale, and it's gradually built up to a large-scale scheme. In terms of kilowatt-hour savings, it was largest between 2008 and 2012, when it delivered savings of about 1% of residential energy use. So the UK scheme applies only to the residential sector, and that's unusual. Most schemes are broader than that, but ours isn't. So as I said, 2008 to 2012 was the sort of high point in terms of scale and ambition. Since then, we've reduced the scale of the scheme in the current phase from 2013 to 2017, partly to fit with a new policy called Green Deal, which was supposed to deliver energy efficiency in the what's called the able to pay, the better off household sector. In the end, that scheme failed and has been withdrawn, but that is partly why our current EEO, called ECO, is smaller than previously, because there was meant to be another parallel policy. And it's currently undergoing revision, and in future the scheme is likely to be focused only on fuel poor or low income households, which will again reduce the amount of kilowatt hour savings from the scheme, because it's having a more social policy focus than an energy saving focus solely. The scheme is placed, the obligation is on energy retailers. There was a small part of the scheme that was placed, for some time an obligation was placed on large electricity generators. That wasn't thought to be successful. So again, now we're back to large retailers only. For most of the history of the scheme, there has just been 6 large companies. I believe it's 7 at the moment. But the point is that there's a very small number of obliged parties, and they are large and sophisticated companies who can should be able to deal with a sort of complex administrative system if that's what's required. So I'm not going to, you'll be glad to know, go through all the details of all of these schemes, but as our schemes, as I mentioned, they've been going over time, the names keep changing, the rules keep changing, and this is a sort of summary of the different phases and the different names that the schemes have been given over time. It also gives you what the annual target, this is lifetime kilowatt hour savings for each phase of the scheme, and it tells you, the bottom line tells you the expenditure by energy companies. So these are the obligated parties, and it's what they have spent to deliver the kilowatt hour savings. It does not include any additional costs by householders or maybe local authorities, any other actors. It's only the cost of the energy companies, but as I will show you, those are the majority of the costs involved in this scheme, because a lot of the measures delivered under all of these schemes have been delivered for free to householders, or certainly they have been delivered for free to what sort of low income or elderly or disabled households. There have been various groups that have been a social priority which have got free measures, and often they have been getting up to 50% of the measures going in under the different schemes. So that's why the majority of the cost is paid by the energy company, because the householders who contribute are just a section of those who are involved in the scheme. As you can see, the costs, the annual expenditure has gone up a lot over time, and was highest in the largest scheme was this scheme called CERT, the Carbon Emissions Reduction Scheme, which ran 2008 to 2012. And these figures that are given here are the figures reported by the energy companies after the end of the scheme. So they're actual expenditure, they're not projections of expenditure. And that's why I haven't got the figures yet for the current phase we're in, called the energy company obligation, which runs till next year. We don't yet know what it will have cost. There are ex-ante estimates that are put into a part of the consultation process before the scheme is developed. But obviously we don't know what the whole thing cost until we get to the end, because that's the way the account, that's when you get an independent evaluation at the end of the scheme, checking the numbers supplied by the energy companies and seeing what the cost has been. So there's a picture in the UK of gradually increasing ambition, increasing costs, and then turning downwards after 2013, partly for political reasons, partly because of other policy coming to fill that space. So a smaller scheme was thought to be needed. So how do we know what it costs? Well, the energy suppliers, the obligated parties, they have to report their costs to Ofgem, which is the regulator of the system, the scheme. But costs per company are confidential, and the data that's publicly available is aggregated across all the companies. The costs that they report, they relate only to the obligated parties, and they don't include any co-funding of efficiency measures by householders, and they don't include the cost to the government and to the energy regulator of administering and regulating the EEO system. Now, in actual fact, the energy companies pay the costs of the regulator, so to some extent they're included in some way. But when we looked within ENSPOL at the figures we could get for cost to government and cost to the regulator of running the scheme, they were, very low in comparison with the cost of measures that go in. So they were in the hundreds of thousands of euros, or very low million euros, compared with hundreds of millions of euros on measures and the cost of delivering efficiency. So it's a small percentage of overall costs. The administration costs of the energy companies, they're asked to estimate those separately from the delivery of the measures costs, represented around 3% of total costs in the 2008 to 2012 part of the scheme. So the last phase for which we've got actual data. So that's relatively low. Of course, there's a bit of a blurry boundary between administration and delivery, and I'm not really sure how useful those figures are, but that's what they are. There aren't any official figures on the additional cost to customers, so how much customers pay in addition to the subsidy they effectively get from their energy companies. There was an ex-ante estimate was that they would pay an average contribution of 30% of the cost. And there has been some empirical work asking customers how much they've paid, but when it was reviewed, it was decided the sample size wasn't big enough for those figures to be really accurate. So this 30% estimate is the best that we've got at the moment. So when we look at that for this, again, it's this 2008 to 2012 phase I'm talking about. If you add in this assumed customer cost and the cost to the energy companies, the cost per kilowatt hour saved across gas and electricity is something like 0.5 pence or 0.625 euro cents, so very, very much lower than the cost of supply. So it has been, particularly in that phase, it was a low-cost scheme, and in that phase there was quite a lot of CFL lighting going in, a lot of loft insulation, a lot of cavity wall insulation. All of these are measures you can deliver in bulk and rather cheaply, and so it was a cheap, widespread scheme that millions of householders benefited from. So the question is then, you've got these costs. Clearly, you know, the scheme was costing hundreds of millions of euros. How are customers paying for that? At first, the first few years of the UK scheme, there was price control was applied, and energy companies were only allowed to charge, it was something like £1, €1.20 per customer per year per fuel. But after 2000, the targets were set in terms of energy saving or carbon saving, and the cost was allowed to be determined by what it actually cost the energy companies. So now, as I've explained before, each phase of the scheme starts, we have estimated costs, but we only get real data after the completion of the phase. So when we look at our latest phase for which we've got real data, the average cost per residential customer per year was around £40, around €50. And that included the scheme, the main scheme, which was aimed at everybody, and a scheme that was aimed at hard to reach customers, which cost quite a lot more per kilowatt hour than the mainstream scheme. So if you put the two together, the total cost was €50 per customer per year, and it was about 20% lower than expected ex ante. And in fact, in previous years, we've seen that as well. The actual delivery by the obligated parties cost less than what they think it will cost to start with, which I think is a sign that the competitive pressures are working to keep prices low. We don't know how exactly the retailers get the money back from customers. If they charge every customer the same amount, that could be regressive in the sense that lower income customers spend less on energy, and the energy efficiency obligation charge would be a higher percentage of their bills. But it's a complicated area, and energy companies aren't obliged to say what they do about it, so we don't really know. So, as I've already mentioned, as in most countries, until very recently, this scheme has been used primarily to deliver relatively low-cost energy efficiency measures. And if you look at the number of beneficiaries compared with the number of people who pay it, millions of people were involved in getting a benefit from the 2008 to 2012 scheme. So we're perhaps a bit less worried about the distribution of costs and benefits in that sort of scheme where the benefits are shared very widely. Our more recent scheme designs focus the benefits on fewer people, and then you might get a little bit more concerned about that, although because the scheme is smaller than it was, the costs are lower, so perhaps of less concern. And I think the final point is how costs are clamped down is that energy companies are assumed to have a strong interest in low-cost delivery within a competitive market, and I don't think there's any evidence to show that isn't true. I think we can be reasonably confident that these energy efficiency measures are being delivered at a low cost in a competitive way to the benefit of the customers. So I think I'll stop there. That's just an introduction to how it works in the UK. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Very clear and also very detailed information about the costs. I remember attendants, but they can ask for questions using the question panel and question function within the control panel GoToWebinar. Nevertheless, if no questions arrived yet, I will pass the panel through will show the French scheme and information about the cost and the cost recovery mechanisms. Please, Elodie.
Good morning, everybody. I think you can hear me.
Yes, all okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dario, for this opportunity to present the French scheme. So I'll share my webcam, so now you can see me, yes. Okay, so a few words about how does cost and cost recovery works within the French scheme. So just as a starter, a few words about obligated parties, because I think how you set up your obligated parties is key when you think about cost recovery. So choosing obligated party is a tremendous but complicated choice in terms of entity. Do you oblige suppliers or distributors? In terms of sector targeted, do you look at all end-use energy sector or only a few? In terms of level of obligation, which can have consequences on energy prices, but also on the ambition of your scheme. And finally, it has tremendous implication on the energy service market. So what we did in France in 2006 when the scheme started is that we obliged energy suppliers of electricity, natural gas, home heating, oil, district heating and cooling, etc., all grid and network energy, as we call them. And we made this choice for different reasons. First, because they were in direct contact with all final energy consumers, and the main objective of the scheme was to trigger energy savings of final energy savings in sectors of dispersed activities, so consumers that were hard to reach, especially in the residential, but also in the small tertiary buildings and in the light industry. We also choose energy suppliers and not energy distributors because most of them, at least the big ones, were already starting to offer energy services to some of their customers, and they were legitimate to do so. And finally, and that last reason is quite connected to the previous one, because making them switch from an energy supply business model to an energy service supply business model seemed to us the way forward. So it was clear to us that energy suppliers had to be the obligated parties within the French scheme, both because of our objective, but also because of the energy transition we are looking towards. So I was talking about ambition earlier, and having an ambitious scheme can also be reached thanks to a larger basis of obligated parties. And this is one of the reasons why, since 2011, automotive fuels distributors are also obligated within the French scheme. And in this case, we looked at working with distributors because it didn't make sense to oblige all single supplier of fuel on the French territories that would have represented thousands and thousands of small energy suppliers. So we chose to oblige automotive fuel distributors. And among obligated parties, I have also to quote the ESCOs, because one way or another, since the beginning of the scheme, ESCOs have always been allowed to participate in the scheme, and within the current period, to be able to participate to the scheme, they have to be obligated, and to do so, they have to receive a delegation of obligation. Basically, if a small energy supplier which is obligated doesn't want to deal with his obligation, doesn't want to produce his own energy savings certificates or to buy them on the market, it can just delegate its obligation to an ESCOs that will obtain the corresponding certificate for them. And so that's how the ESCOs are part of the scheme as obligated parties. So basically, with all what I told you, you can see that we have a big pool of obligated parties within the French scheme, and it's a pool of very different actors. We have historical suppliers that used to be in a monopoly and that are selling electricity and gas at state-regulated prices, and this is quite important. We also have new electricity and gas suppliers, thanks to the energy market liberalization. They have smaller market shares, but they have increasing market shares because over the past few years they've been able to propose prices below regulated prices. As I said, we have large automotive fuel distributors such as Total, BP, etc. We also have a few small local suppliers supplying heating fuel, but also electricity. We have a few electricity companies on the Rhone, for instance. And finally, we have ESCOs, which are usually SMEs, but quite big SMEs right now, that were delegated an obligation and that are taking part in the scheme. And so if you look at this pool of obligated parties, you can see that they have very different sizes, from EDF or NGs that are multinational or Total, to some SMEs of maybe a few dozens employees. You have so very different means in terms of financial resources, human resources, experience in terms of energy efficiency and energy savings. And finally, you have very different strategies from historical suppliers that started to look at energy services and energy efficiency long before we started the scheme, to other actors that have started to work on this field very recently. And this all produce quite different strategies to produce energy saving certificates, and it leads to very different costs for producing these certificates, and it also means these actors have very different abilities to recover these costs. So now let's look at the costs. So the first point, which is quite important and quite difficult for us to deal with, is that there are no public information available on obligated parties' costs. They have to report costs to the ministry one way or another, but we are not aware of how this works, and we have no access to this cost, even aggregated one. The only piece of information we have is a public assessment that was conducted in 2013 by the public authority, and that concluded that the average obligated parties costs are of 0.4 euro cents per kilowatt-hour CUMAC. What we call CUMAC is cumulated and actualized over the lifetime. So it's not per annum, it's really cumulated and actualized. 75% for the incentives, so the incentives being either subsidy or a free diagnosis or a loan with a low rate, and 25% for administrative costs. So that was the average, and one of the conclusion of this public assessment was that there was a lot of difference on the spread of this cost, with costs much higher for some obligated parties. For instance, historical energy suppliers such as EDF and NGDF, which is now NG, and other actors such as automotive fuel distributors that manage to collect energy saving certificates with very low cost. So that represents 0.03 euro cent per kilowatt-hour saved on an annual basis. and it's over 300 million euros invested per year between 2011 and 2014. So that's, as I said, the sole information we have on obligated parties cost since the beginning of the scheme. We used to think that what we call the market, which is not really a market, but which is a place where you can sell and buy energy saving certificates, we used to think that the market price was quite revealing of what were the costs of obligated parties. Which some suppliers always deny, but it was the only thing we had, so we used to look at it. What you can see is that between 2011 and 2013, the market price was quite similar to the price the public assessment found out, around 0.4 euro cents per kilowatt-hour QMAC. But ever since then, the price has been decreasing a lot. Hopefully, we've reached a lower point at the beginning of 2016, and the market is going to go up again. But we can't really rely anymore on this market to have a clear view of obligated costs. So we don't have a clear view of obligated costs. We only have an average from 2013, and we don't really have a clear view on cost recovery either. In the general case, energy suppliers can pass their costs directly to the consumers. This is allowed. We assume any supplier is able to do it, and for instance, the number we can find out is that the energy saving certificate scheme should represent a 2.7 euro cents increase per liter of diesel in 2016, which is, well, if we have to compare it, it is to compare to a 4 euro cents increase due to the carbon tax. So we are still looking at small increase compared to the actual cost of energy and of diesel. So this is one example, but then when we talk with obligated parties, and especially with new entrants, which are some smaller suppliers than the historical one, what they tell us is that they are gaining market shares by proposing prices that are below regulated prices, and they do not wish to increase these prices, or they won't gain market share anymore. So they have the ability to pass their costs directly to consumers, but most of them try not to do it in order to gain market shares. And now if we look at providers of electricity and gas at state-regulated prices, so that's only two energy suppliers, they can recover some of their costs through a tax on energy bills, which is a general tax that also funds renewables, price equality between territories, etc. So it is kind of melted down among other uses for this tax. These obligated parties tell us that this only partly recover their costs. So, well, it's a start, but apparently it's not enough to cover all costs that these parties have. And according to the French energy regulator in 2014, this represented 1% of the electricity bill for households and 0.5% of the gas bill. So once again, it remains a low price distributed over all electricity and gas consumers, and but it doesn't cover all costs incurred. But once again, we don't know what really costs are incurred. So I think I'm done with my presentation. What to take from the French scheme is that we don't know much about costs and about cost recovery. Because, as I said, with the market liberalization, this has all become very confidential, very sensitive information. So I can understand we have little access to this data. I wish we had a better view of aggregated data, the way the UK has, for instance. But yeah, so far that's the little we know, and I think this lack of transparency is a real problem within our scheme, because it makes everything difficult when you want to set an ambitious target, because an ambitious target means more costs that may not be recovered, and so it all becomes much more of a threat than an opportunity, and it's too bad we can't manage to turn this EEO into an opportunity. One final word is that we always talk about costs, not that much about benefits. And within AGEM, we are convinced that there are benefits from this scheme, even for energy suppliers. As I said, energy suppliers started to look into energy services and energy efficiency long before we set that kind of scheme. And we know now most big energy suppliers have subsidiaries that provide energy services. So that scheme create costs, but it also creates benefits. It also creates activities, growth, employment, and it will be interesting to have a broader view of the impact of this scheme. I'm done. Thank you. Back to you, Dario.
Okay, thank you very much, Elodie. And of course, these first presentations showed you that costs can be very different from one country to the other, and of course that depends on the absolute value of the target and also on the type of solutions that are allowed to be presented within the scheme. And also cost recovery approaches can be very different. All of them can have advantages and disadvantages. Of course, to know them in details will mean to have a much higher comprehension of the cost effectiveness of these schemes. This is one of the things that within the ENSPOL project we found more difficult to assess, because many times the managing parties don't have enough information to clearly define the cost effectiveness of these schemes. And also because even with this knowledge, as Elodie was saying just a minute before, of course the benefit can be a lot. Not only you can't only speak about the cost of the scheme, or the cost incurred by the obliged parties, or the cost in the tariffs. For example, you can speak about the development of the ESCO market, the development of new business models, and the general achievement within the global energy system. So this is something very interesting to discuss about. Now it is time for the last presentation about the Italian scheme from Alberto Pela, GSE. And so please, Alberto, take the panel.
Good morning everyone. Good morning, Dario. I think that you can hear me.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, great. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, first of all, Dario, and thank you all for this important opportunity to share with all of you the main sort of overview of our cost of the energy efficiency obligation scheme and the cost recovery mechanism in Italy. In particular, I have prepared this presentation. I don't know if you can see it. Okay, I'm going also to share my personal webcam. Okay, first of all, and then I think that's all set it out.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Great. So, just a few seconds to present my company. I think that most of you already know our roles in the energy sector. By the way, as you know, GSE is the state-owned company which promotes and supports the renewable energy sources and energy efficiency in Italy. The sole shareholder of GSE is the Ministry of Economic and Finance, and which exercises its rights in consultation with the Ministry of Economic Development. But also GSE is the parent company of 3 subsidiaries, as you see below, so EU, GME, and RSE. all active in the energy sector. About our activities, so first of all, GSE promotes the renewable energy sources in Italy. We manage several support schemes related to renewable energy sector, but also in the energy efficiency one. Concerning the renewable energy sources in Italy, we managed and we have developed in Italy green certificates, support schemes, feed-in tariff, feed-in premium, but also others. I would like to focus, of course, on the energy efficiency sector. So we have developed in Italy, as you know, white certificate mechanism. We are the public company which manage this mechanism, also in collaboration with important support offered by ROC and Enea. So very important, a strong also collaboration between all of these Italian public agencies in order to manage altogether the energy efficiency development in Italy. So in particular, like, okay, these are also other activities related to technical inspection and also verification activities that are carried out by GSE. By the way, in Italy, like all other European countries, the Italian priorities in the energy field are strictly related to the main issues of securing energy supply, reducing greenhouse gases, and pollution, and also pollutant emissions. To this end, since March 2013, Italy adopted the National Energy Strategy. We are setting out ambitious targets in the energy efficiency field. And as you can see in these columns and these graphs, the last dark gray column show you our national energy strategy targets. So in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases emission, renewable energy resources development, but also in the energy efficiency, particular primary energy consumption, we have set out ambitious targets also related to the European ones. So we believe that this targets are already set out at European level, but also at a national level. Also, we would like to do more. So, in particular, in fact, through the national decree, our national decree 102/2014. One second, that let's. Sorry, because. Okay, that's all. So, in particular, to the national decree, in order to develop energy efficiency in Italy, we have set out a lot of tools, such as the white certificate support scheme mechanism. We think that the white certificate scheme is one of the most important tools to promote energy efficiency in Italy. And as you can see in the last graph on your on the left of the slide, it will be we will reach, thanks to the white certificate scheme, the 60% of our national target. The scheme was introduced in 2004, so but also has been improved during the following years. Now I would like to focus on it. Let's go ahead. Okay. Electricity and natural gas distributors with more than 50,000 customers are required to achieve yearly quantitative primary energy saving targets. They are expressed in tons saved. White certificates, in particular, are credible instruments of giving the proof of the achievement of a specific energy savings. And distributors with more than 50,000 customers can fulfill their obligation of white certificate schemes year by year. Okay. In two ways, or obtaining a white certificate from GSE, so through the implementation of the energy efficiency projects. Also, but also purchasing white certificates from third party on the spot market. So there are two options, or on the spot market that are managed by a GSC, or through bilateral agreements. So these are the two options where the obliged parties can purchase white certificates. They have some specific targets, yearly targets, and I would like to go ahead because I would like to focus on our costs. So on the left, you can see that, okay, as I told before, the obliged parties are all the electricity and gas distributors with more than 50,000 customers. The voluntary parties, so there are all the parties or all the suppliers that offer a lot of services in this field, such as energy service companies, but also the companies with an energy manager appointed according our specific law, companies with energy manager appointed, but also on a voluntary basis, and also companies certified. So these are our volunteer parties active in the energy white certificate schemes. Concerning the obliged distributors, in Italy in 2015, we had 61 obliged distributors, composed by 13 from the electrical sector and 48 from the natural gas sector. You can see that also they had achieved 4 million white certificate and 3 million white certificate during the 2015. One distributor that is Enel has most 50% of obligations. 60 distributors have also in the sector 75% of obligations, you can see. Okay, now so it's important also to underline the very important role offered by energy service company, because they are around 1,000. We have 1,000 energy service companies that were active during the last year in the white certificate sectors. Then, okay, that's the spot market and bilateral agreements. How does it work? I'm going to go ahead. Okay, just let's focus a little bit on this graph. This graph shows the white certificate issued from 2006 to 2015. Particularly in Italy, were issued 36 million of white certificates, of which 35% traded on the regulated market. The other 65% by bilateral agreements. Okay, that's the regional distribution and energy savings reached during 2014. So you can see that we have also a sort of wide regional distribution concerning our energy efficiency project that were developed during the last years. So from the north to the south. This slide is important because underline and show you how our mechanism is focused on the industrial sector. In fact, in particular, 64% of white certificates issued on 2015 were issued to the industrial sector. So we issued 3 million white certificates to the industrial sector. The industrial sector accounts for 64%, the civils one 32%, and the lighting one 4%. So it's our most important tool dedicated to the industrial sector. So now we can, I think that I give you a general overview of the mechanism. Now it's time to focus on the cost of our energy efficiency obligation scheme, so our white certificates. The cost of the energy efficiency title mechanism relates on the electricity and gas customer bills. In particular, for example, we have the acronym UC7, that is on the Italian electricity bills, or spesa per oneri di sistema. Considering the total amount of energy efficiency total cost related to the obliged party, the Italian energy regulator, so the Italian Authority for Energy and Gas Sector, authorized the obliged parties to cover the total expenditures by customer bills. So that's the our main option, as also showed by Vasily. So it's sort of option 2. Okay, so where the cost of meeting energy saving targets are funded by, yes, customer bills, but also I will show you that also operators contribute to, with a sort of fee to the cost of the mechanism. So the energy efficiency title cost, the white certificate cost, is defined by our authority, considering the energy efficiency title yearly market. In order to define the total cost, we have a sort of ex-ante, and so pre-arranged or ex-ante contribution, and also ex-post, so a definitive contribution. You can see also the formula below. The energy efficient title definitive contribution, so ex-post, on 2014 was 105 euro per title, per energy efficiency title. The pre-arranged, so on 2015 it was 180 euros per titles. Of course, the market growth, and so the price, the price in 2015 was the 114 euros. So, considering the rate contribution of 105 euros, the total economic burden of the fulfillment of the objective 2014, including the, of course, the 2030 compensation, amounted to 100,000 for obliged parties. So 670 million euros. It costs the mechanism for the obliged parties, so distributors of electricity and gas. Now I would like to show you also how much does it cost for the average customer. This graph shows in particular the residential sector. So our residential customer with a 3 kilowatt electricity power, with 2,700 kilowatt in terms of consume. The cost of the mechanism that was on his bill grew from 0.7 euro cent that we had on 2014, go to, and now you can see the yellow column is the electrical sector, so electrical bill. The blue one, so the blue column express the gas bills. So it costs per year 10 euros on the electrical on the gas sector for the gas sector, so for the gas bills, and it costs 4.8 euro concerning the electricity bill. That's for residential sector. Here we have also the correlation between the energy efficient title market exchange price that we have on an individual session and the definitive tariff contribution. So, as I told before, we have developed our white certificate mechanism during the last years. And also, we have, since January 2015, in order to decrease the total cost of the bills, so in order to involve the operators also in the cost of the mechanism, we have inserted a small fee that the The proponents should pay when presenting a project or communicating some measures year per year for both for simplified plan, but also for monitoring projects. So we have inserted this fee, and it is composed by a fixed fee. It ranges between 100 euros to 2,500 euros, depending on the size and the type of the project. But also there is a variable fee of €1 per issued certificate project, above 100 certificates per year. In the chart below, you can see in particular the details. So how much the proponents must pay when present a project or communicate a mission per year for simplified monitoring plan and also monitoring plan project. So it depends on the size of the project. PPM and RBC, you can see that it goes with the number of the energy efficiency indicators related to the project, but also there is a variable fee of €1 per one. So this in terms of proponent costs. We have also to consider administrative costs, of course. I haven't any official data. But as I told you, all of our GSC activities, all the GSC activities related to the white certificate mechanism are carried on by also ENEA and RSC in terms of evaluation activities. We can estimate, I cannot give you a specific economic cost, but I can say that I can figure out and focus on human resources that are working every day on this kind of mechanism. GC as a specific unit, of course, that they are dedicated to the white certificate mechanism. My colleagues are around 15, and so in terms of human resources that are active, not active, that working every day on the white certificate mechanism are 15, maximum 20 people. But also, we carry out also all of our evaluation activities thanks to the support and important collaboration of ENEA and RSC. I think that they have other, I don't know how many human resources they are dedicated, but my colleagues told me that they are similar to us in terms of number of people. Unfortunately, I haven't any official costs, but I can check it out, and if I find it, I will send you in the next occasion. So I have finished with my presentation. I have also, of course, we like to improve our mechanism day by day. So before ending our presentation, I have prepared a last slide. So lesson learned from our white certificate mechanism. We noticed that it is the most effective support schemes in terms of euro and tape saved. It is, of course, a market scheme, it's very important. Regulation define categories of the projects and subjects directly eligible, and the market selects so technologies and sectors. The most important thing is the rule of the market and the selection of core and its selection in the technologies and sectors that are that can offer for the operators an opportunity to develop also energy efficiency. So from the civil sector to the industrial ones. Our mechanism also, of course, in fact, over 10 years of experience. So right now we underline the rule of industrial sector in the white certificate scheme. White certificate price, but also white certificate costs, we can say, are transparent and public. So most of the costs are very transparent. I think that it's all regulated. So also the tariff contributions is tariff components is regulated year by year by our regulators. So last year was 105 euro per title, per energy efficiency title. So we can say that, okay, yeah, we are transparent in terms of also cost. There is a high participation from private sector to the ESCO, thanks to, in particular, the ESCO involvement. Both white certificate market options are very useful and are considered by obliged parties. In particular, the energy efficiency title market accounted 35%, bilateral agreements, as I also show you, it accounted 64%. So both are very important. But also it's very important to carry out verification activities, and these are very important, necessary in order to ensure the white certificate scheme operation and also development. So I have finished with my presentation, and I would like to thank you again for your participation. So I'm done, Dario. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alberto. Thank you to all the speakers for their presentations, and I think you got a lot of information about costs of different schemes and cost recovery approaches in use around the world, not only in the examples we gave about UK, France, Italy, particular schemes. Do you have any questions for the speakers? If you have, you can use the question panel. Because after the webinar, we won't have the possibility to ask questions to our speakers, so I think it's a good opportunity. Usually in the other webinars we have on this issues, we got a lot of questioning. It's of course a technical issue, the theme of cost recovery, and that can impact the success of a scheme, since of course the higher the target, the higher the cost, and so the higher the perception from the end users, whatever the type of cost recovery approach is. Sure? No questions? If not, I just give you some information. The first one is that all the presentation will be available on the ENSPOL website, so enspol.eu. Under the event tag, so you can go event webinars and you will find the proceedings and the registration, and also you can find the proceedings of the webinars that have been implemented between last December and March. In the meantime, question has arrived, and the question is, are there ways to capture customer costs in the UK scheme and in the French scheme? So this is a question for Tina and Elodie. If you thought about approaches to collect information about the costs incurred by the customers in both schemes. Tina told us before that in fact the cost for the end users was negligible due to the fact that usually the utilities paid for the low-cost intervention, but if you have some, please.
I can answer for France.
Yeah, okay,
if it's okay. We don't collect data about consumers' cost, but we have a pretty good idea of that kind of cost, because basically the subsidy that obligated parties offered are proportional to the energy savings we attribute to each operation. And then the main obligated parties have website where you can either simulate or calculate how much subsidy you're going to get if you apply for the energy saving certificate scheme. So what we see is that in the residential sector, the energy saving certificate can cover 5 to 15%. I would say, at least it used to when the market was a bit higher. But yeah, it can cover, let's say, 5 to 15% of the costs. And so what remains is at the charge of the household. In the tertiary sector and in the industrial sector, we have higher coverage, but it varies for each single operation. So I can't give you a single data, but we can access this data just by knowing roughly how much the measures cost and the kind of subsidies they're getting from the obligated parties.
Okay, this is Tina. Just to say about the UK, the household or the customer contribution, there is some evidence on it that has been gathered through surveys of some customers and interviews with stakeholders, and but what the evaluators of the scheme decided was that the data we'd got wasn't that might not be that representative. So there are certainly ways of finding out how much the customers who have to pay, what they do pay, but more resources just need to be put into doing more surveys, more evaluation, be more systematic, so that we can be sure the numbers we've got are representative rather than just particular, because the UK schemes tend to have quite a lot of different rules which change over time, and different measures going to different sorts of customers in different circumstances. So you need a proper set of data to be sure the numbers you've got are representative of the whole scheme. So we have got some data, but it's just not thought to be quite good enough at the moment. So certainly that could be improved if there's the will to do it.
Okay, perfect. Another question is, what is the position of the different countries on fines? So, of course, for mandatory and obliged parties that don't reach their targets. Are they part of a scheme? Explicit? If so, are they related to the costs? And have ever been implemented over the years?
Okay, so Elodie again. For France, we have two types of fines. We have fines for obligated parties that wouldn't reach their obligation, and the fine is 20 euro per megawatt QMAC. So this is 5 times what the market price used to be, and since the market price has gone so low right now, it's 10 times the market price. So obligated parties have a clear incentive either to produce their own energy saving certificate or to buy them on the market, but I mean they have really no interest in waiting to pay for the penalty. And so that's the fine if they do not reach their obligation. And we have another fine when control are implemented. If there is a fraud from obligated parties, they can get a fine that is twice the penalty. So that is 40 euro per megawatt QMAC. So that would be 20 times the market price right now. So I'm not aware that the 40 euro fine has ever been implemented, because control started very recently and there hasn't been, I think, really big fraud. But for the first and the second period of the scheme, a few obligated parties, really small obligated parties, 3 small obligated parties had to pay the penalty because they did not reach their obligation.
Okay.
This is Tina. Yes, in the UK, fines are part of the system for all the obligated parties. If they don't reach their target, there are fines which are determined by the regulator. So they're not set out like in France, you know, as a fixed multiplier of the costs. They're determined on a case-by-case basis. The first time this has only happened at the end of the 2012 scheme because it's the first time that the targets weren't met, and a number of companies were fined up to tens of millions of euros, and they still had to get the measures put in place. So there was a fine, and the measures still had to be done. So I think it's felt to have been a good, strong control mechanism, and the fact that this is the first time it happened shows that it had been sufficient deterrent in the past.
Okay.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, Daniel. Yeah, also in Italy, penalties and fines are part of the system, of course. They are all regulated. It was we regulated on 2014 by our Italian Authority for Energy. In particular, our fines. So our fines are so all related to the number of white certificates that the obliged parties has not reached. So it will be the obliged parties that hasn't reached the energy savings, but also particularly they haven't got the white certificates will be fined by our authorities, depending on the number of white certificate titles that they lack. So. And then there will be also a sort of compensations element. So during also the next 2 years, it will be also respect their targets and also the white certificate they must buy or achieve. So yeah, we have it, and I don't think that there are. I don't have here the number, the specific number of last year now, but I can find out. Okay.
Okay, Alberto, there is another question which is for you, and is how does Italy cope with the recent surge in household cost, as shown in slide 21? It was a slide in which you put the figures of the EET estimate cost per average customer in the residential sector.
Of the target saving, okay, 1 second.
In fact, I would say that on this topic, it's an important surge, that's true, but on a very low absolute and relative values on the electricity and gas price paid by the average customer. So, in fact, it's not a real issue in terms of global cost. I'm wondering.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I'm wondering the reason behind this increase in the cost, because there has not been such an increase in the system cost between 2015 and 2016. Perhaps it is also related to the recent revolution in the residential tariffs that has been decided by our regulator on the approach to pay the renewable and energy efficiency costs through the tariffs, because it used to be done on the variable component, so on kilowatt hours, and now it is being moved partly on the fixed components, so euro per kilowatt and euro per client. So this can be part of the answer, but
I agree, Dario. No.
Okay. And another question is if there are estimates of euro per kilowatt hour or euro per ton of oil equivalent saved at EU level. I don't think so. Of course, in the ENSPOL platform, there is information available for this indicator in different countries. Whenever available, but in fact it's an indicator that has to be taken with a little bit of care, because it may change a lot depending on the type of support scheme. For example, if the support scheme is mainly targeted at very low-cost measures, of course this indicator should be low. If instead, for example, the support scheme is aimed mainly, let's say, at the building envelope, but of course as higher cost, we will find a very high indicator, but this of course has nothing to do with the cost effectiveness of the scheme. It's just a measure of how much we are paying to save a kilowatt hour, but we don't know the quality of the kilowatt hour. I don't know if the other speaker want to say something about this.
I think I would add that I'm not sure it would make sense to have that kind of indicator at the European level, because measures can have very different prices from one member state to another, depending on, for instance, how building stock. If you have some cavity walls or you have no cavity walls at all, insulation is going to cost a lot more or not. And at the same time, we have very different prices, retailing prices for energy, and even for producing energy. So something that might not sound coherent or interesting, or I mean, in a member state, because energy prices are very low, might be interesting in another country because energy prices are higher. So I'm not sure it would make sense to try to compare that kind of indicator from one country to another.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of you, with Elodie. Yeah, energy prices are too different. It was also discussed last time, during one of the ENSPOL initiatives. Also, the white certificate mechanism, if it could be possible to create a sort of white certificate, European white certificate scheme. The most important, we have always to consider that energy price at European level is too different, so it's not possible to compare the Euro 8 at the same level. Yeah, it doesn't make any very interesting sense. Done.
Okay. Any other questions? No, in that case, thank you very much for your participation, and thank you to all the speakers. I will just add that on the 19th of July there will be the next webinar on how to start up an energy efficiency obligation scheme, and on the 21st of July the last one on monitoring and verification practices. In the main page on the ENSPOL website, enspol.eu, you will also find the link to the ENSPOL Now sharing platform that was illustrated briefly by Vlasis in the first presentation. And here you can find really a lot of information, and you can both look at information related to a single country, or also considering, for example, particular topics, as you can see, 100 topics, and also have a view on the main aspects of the Article 7 of the Energy Efficiency Directive. In the ENSPOL website, you will find the proceeding of the webinar under events and webinars, as I told you before. So please access them if you want to download the presentations and have a look at the other webinars, of course. And you will also find the proceeding, for example, for our final conference that took place more or less 1 month ago in Brussels. So thank you very much to everybody for being with us. I hope this webinar has been useful, and see you next time. Bye-bye and have a nice day.
Thank you.